Chapter 1. On a moonlit night, in the woods of the suburbs of Luoyang City, a woman in black quickly leapt over a branch, her pose mimicking the wind and making her seem like a monster. The enemies behind her were gradually thrown off her track. But all of a sudden, through the layer upon layer of branches in front of her, a few other human shadows suddenly burst forth and pounced on her. Rendong's brows tightened as she turned her head and immediately ran towards the east. Unexpectedly, the moment she turned, a concealed weapon shot towards her to kill her. She dodged it by leaning her head back, but she still received a gash on her cheek. The black fabric that covered her face slid, revealing an extremely delicate and pretty face under the moonlight. She touched her cheek, which had numbed instantly. Her many years of experience licking blood at the edge of the knife told her that the secret weapon was poisoned. At this moment, she could only stake everything in a fight, and kill all her enemies who were chasing her. Then, based on how lucky she was, she would fight the poison within her, and perhaps she could still take back her life. The enemies behind her closed in on her. Rendong's eyes brightened and she unsheathed her sword. When she fought, she was fast yet ruthless. The cold sword made a mark in the moon, as she danced a bloodthirsty tale of flowery nuances. In the blink of an eye, she had taken 2 lives. The forest made rustling noises as more people advanced. Rendong coldly looked at them, the fresh blood on her face making her seem just like a Jura from hell. 10ish people overtook her and surrounded her. Someone said, "She's been poisoned. Let us wait for the moment until the poison overtakes her, and then we can easily kill her." Rendong's fingertips already felt numb. She coldly mocked, "Scoundrels." Everyone at the scene was young and vigorous men. Which of them would be able to take a woman's mockings? Someone angrily said, "The Nanjiang Demonic Sect slaughtered citizens in the Central Plains. They have been declared guilty. You are the one who should be called a scoundrel. Everyone screams your name and fights you." Rendong's lips slightly twitched, almost smiling, as she coldly laughed. In the old days, fighting with thousands of useless people from the Central Plains Wulin was equivalent to me teaching 100 people to fight. Today, the 100 of you also cannot hinder me from going to Luoyang to look for someone. The Central Plains are sick and weakly. If you guys scream my name and try to fight me, aren't you guys just screaming? When these words burst forth, everyone was so angry that they lost their reason. With great wah sounds, they all gathered around and attacked, vowing to dismember this demonic sect woman's body into many pieces. Rendong secretly laughed. She had successfully made it so that she would be able to resolve this in the shortest time possible, even if this was her most sorry fight in all these years. In the end, she used her teeth to snap the neck of her last opponent. She had swallowed a bellyful of blood, and the warm blood somewhat relieved her gradually stiffening limbs from the poison. The fishy taste that encased her entire mouth made her consciousness feel somewhat more awakened. She pushed aside the unmoving body and strained to pick up her sword as she rapidly walked out of the forest in which she had killed all who pursued her, through hand-to-hand combat. The sun was about to cut open the mist, as the light from daybreak blurred her vision. She felt this time she really wouldn't be able to survive. She had suffered a serious injury and extreme loss of blood, her body was filled with toxic poison, and there had been many people pursuing her to kill. Any of these dangerous situations could have had her life. Rendong strained to support her body, as her footsteps became weaker and weaker as she continued to walk forwards even though she had no idea where she was going. Suddenly, her foot twisted. The world soundlessly spun about her. The blue sky and white clouds in her view gradually became blurred. As she closed her 2 eyes, she vaguely saw someone who looked like a scholar grasp his chin and appraise her curiously. She seemed to remember that many years ago, an old and ugly sour scholar had harped in her ears, his tone full of distress, "All scholars are poor. None of them can find a wife." She didn't know where she got the strength, but she grabbed the scholar's lapel and with an extremely murderous aura she said, "Save me and I'll marry you. The dowry of 10 silver taels." The scholar was startled. After narrowing his eyes to think it over for a moment, he said, "I only accept gold." "Oh, gold." Chapter 2. According to the rumors in the Jianghu, there was a divine doctor in Luoyang City. He could treat hundreds of illnesses, he could resurrect the dead and elongate lives, and could save dying people. When Rendong woke up again, she was in a clean house. Her strange surroundings made her get up immediately out of vigilance. When she inadvertently tugged at the wounds on her body, she suddenly remembered why she would be here. She had proposed to a scholar. From what it looked like to her, that scholar must have saved her. Rendong touched the tightly bound bandages on her body. In her heart she thought, after I see that scholar again and thank him, I'll just kill him. If more people knew of her whereabouts, it would be more dangerous, and now, she hated risking her own life the most. A clatter of footsteps could be heard outside the courtyard, almost as if someone was walking back and forth in the courtyard working. Rendong listened for a while and could hear that the footsteps were heavy and sluggish, which meant that they didn't belong to someone who knew martial arts. She relaxed and opened the door to go out empty-handed. Strong rays of sunlight entered the courtyard, so piercing that it made her frown. But then after a while, she could see clearly. This ordinary residential courtyard had a lot of medicinal herbs planted in all its nooks and crannies. A man in black was currently crouching at one end, humming a song as he pulled up the herbs in the ground. Peaches, 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 peaches of demons, 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 brilliant, brilliant. When she heard this song, the usually indifferent Rendong's lips twitched. She coughed to get the man's attention. Ah! The man was so frightened that he sucked in a huge gulp of air and jumped up, falling to the ground. He put his hand on his chest and looked at Rendong for a long time before frowning and grumbling, I'll say, girl, girl. Walking around making sounds is what a living person does. After you die, you won't be able to make a sound even if you wanted to. Rendong expressionlessly looked at him, you saved me. The man patted his butt and stood up. With a bit of haughtiness, he rose his head, besides this noble gentleman, who else could have saved you? Rendong nodded, thank you. She concentrated her power on her fingertips, intending to snap off the man's neck as soon as he started walking. Then, right when she was about to make a move, the man added, as long as you take the medicine that I'll prescribe for you, the crappy poison in your body will be eliminated. The internal energy that was being pushed onto her fingertips immediately dissipated without a trace. The previously indifferent voice now inevitably carried some urgency, you can get rid of the poison in my body. The man laughed, proud of himself, there is no poison in this world that I can't eliminate. Rendong's eyes brightened, and it was difficult for her to conceal the excited motions of her lips. The man continued, but, while I can get rid of the poison, I cannot get rid of goo. The person who gave you the devouring core goo must personally get rid of it, otherwise, even if you could communicate with the heavens, no one could save you. Rendong was startled, and mockingly laughed, how dare I have extravagant hope of freedom. The moment she entered the Nanjiang shaman sect, besides being dead, there was no other way for anyone to be free from the sect after they joined. She had only wanted to continue living and prolong her life a few years. The man appraised her, his head to one side. Her almost human-like expression had only lasted on her face for a short period. She made her face cold again and asked, can you get rid of the poison from the reborn turtle doves? That poison. I used to know how to, but I don't know if I can do it anymore. I can try it out. Rendong sized him up for a long time, you're that legendary divine doctor. Just about. The man touched his forehead, seemingly pained. People fear fame just as pigs fear fattening up. I already paid attention to concealing my world-shocking talents, but I was still not careful enough and was found out. What shall I do? What shall I do? Rendong pressed the hidden mechanism in her sleeve and swiftly took out the spring-loaded arrow. Her eyes flashed with coldness as she pointed the arrow at the man's throat. I, Nanjiang Shaman Sect Emissary, Rendong, cordially invite you to go down south, under the orders of the sect leader. Almost as if he did not see the arrowhead pointed at his neck, which was infused with poison from indigo, the man soliloquized, Rendong? Honeysuckle. His eyes swept over Rendong twice as he laughed, according to an ancient proverb. Crops die from flooding, the grass dies early. Pomegranates die from freezing, melons die from getting too much sun. But nothing will affect the honeysuckle. As a matter of fact, from what I see, I can feel your will to live. Rendong coldly said, I cordially invite you to go down south. All right, all right. I never said I wouldn't go. The man good-tempered replied, if I were you, I wouldn't treat a physician like this. According to custom, he cupped one hand in another and bowed to Rendong in an extremely scholarly manner. Rendong quickly put her arrow away, for fear of accidentally poking him. If that happened, there really wouldn't be anyone who could save the sect leader. If the sect leader didn't survive, the devouring Korgu would be unable to be suppressed by drugs, and when the time came, she would die an extremely miserable death. You may call me Jiulu Yan. In the instant that he leaned over, a calming fragrance floated over to the tip of her nose through the air. Rendong became absent-minded for a split second, and when she looked up again, she saw the man's sunny and balmy smiling face as she fainted from the February sunlight. Chapter 3. On the way home, Rendong had the urge to find a place where she could get rid of Jiulu. She did not understand how God had let this gentleman with morals live independently up until now. After walking for an hour, he needed to rest. When he came across the water in a lake, he first needed to boil it and then let it cool before he could drink it. He loved sneaking into remote places to find herbal plants, no matter if he ended up tumbling down a steep hill, or hurting his foot from a trap that some hunters had left behind. When that happened, he would miserably call her for help. Because of him, Rendong went down a lot of pointless roads, but it was also because of the routes they took that the people chasing after her to kill her decreased significantly. It was night. Due to Jiulu's tarrying again, the two had not been able to reach the approaching village in time and thus could only sleep outdoors on the outskirts of the village. Rendong angrily created a fire, with a roaring blaze, and after she put some more firewood into the fire, she went off to hunt without saying a word. Jiulu clasped his hands together and sat next to the fire, rubbing his hands while he shivered. He even sighed and kept harping, "I'm so cold and so hungry. Little flowery flower, you have to hurry back. Otherwise, your divine doctor will die, die. If you die, fine," Rendong thus thought. When she returned with 2 wild hares, Jiulu was sitting cross-legged next to the bonfire, holding a pouch embroidered with orchids as he counted his money, his face a picture of anxiety. When he looked up and saw the slowly returning Rendong, he immediately laughed. "Little flowery flower, hurry back and warm up. Tonight is so cold." Rendong stared blankly, her eyes softening. Someone like this, probably always lived life extremely happily. She sat down and silently began to skin the hare. Jiulu started to blabber about how pitiful the little bunny was, going to hell without a heart or lungs. But when Rendong finished cooking the hare, he was the one who enjoyed his food the most. "Little flowery flower, will your sect leader give me money for treating him?" Jiulu asked. After he was full, Jiulu sat next to a tree and covered up his little embroidered bag. "How much do you want?" 10 golden taels. Rendong nodded. When he mentioned this topic, she suddenly remembered the conditions he asked for when he saved her. She glanced at Jiulu and saw that he was gazing back at her with a burning gaze. Rendong turned around and added more firewood to the fire. "What are you looking at? Little flowery flower, after I help your sect leader get better, will we get married?" Rendong's current heartbeat resembled a Martian explosion. Her lips slightly twitched as she looked back at Jiulu. "What did you say?" Jiulu eagerly rushed over and pitifully looked back at her. "Are you trying to go back on your words? That day you said it yourself. If I save you, you'll marry me, and you'll gift me with 10 golden taels," he said. "I am a magnanimous person. I won't ask for my wife's money, but even if I don't want the money, I still want my wife." Rendong indifferently turned around, as she fiddled with the fire. "I'll give you money, 20 golden taels to buy your wife." Jiulu's eyes swelled up with tears. "Little flowery flower wifey." The veins on Rendong's temples began to jump as she resisted the urge to beat him up. Jiulu walked around her, trying to figure out how she was feeling, which made Rendong impatiently pick her hand up to push him over. Who would have thought that the moment Rendong lifted her hand, Jiulu immediately held her hand. "Little flowery flower, your finger has so many little cuts." To Rendong, she was pretty much already numb to the pain from the cuts on her fingers that had formed from the thistles in their path. She tried to take her hand back, but Jiulu anticipated her move and forced her finger into his mouth. The warmth from his soft tongue licked over all of Rendong's wounds on her finger. The ambiguity of their interactions made her face turn red. "After I suck your wounds a little, your fingers won't hurt anymore and your wounds will get better faster." Rendong stood up abruptly, and she hurriedly took 2 steps back, almost as if he was some sort of fierce beast. You. Jiulu laughed merrily. "Little flowery flower wifey, don't be shy." Before he could finish, something shiny flashed past his eyes, and his expression slightly sank. He looked up at the stars covering the sky and said, "It is said that on a night when the sky is full of stars, a fantastical medicinal herb will grow in places with water. Let's go pick a few." The topic had changed too quickly, and Rendong was a bit slow on the uptake for a moment. After some silence, she said, "This place is about 10 li from the nearest river. It's too far." "Ah, I've remembered. The antidote from the reborn turtle dove's poison should require that herb." Rendong pursed her lips and sighed regretfully. "If I would have known that you would be fooling around with me this entire journey, I would have removed your arm and leg." Jiulu Yan laughed harmlessly and turned around to extinguish the fire. Let's leave a bit sooner. The flowers only bloom for a short while, and if we were to miss it, I don't know what we could do. Chapter 4. On a February night, still as cold as before. The surroundings are completely silent. Rendong covered Jiulu Yan's mouth and hid in a cluster of reeds. Right after they had extinguished the fire, and were preparing to leave, Rendong heard rustling noises and footsteps. At once, she knew that this was bad, and dragged Jiulu Yan towards the river as they began to run. However, she would have never thought that this time, at least 100 people were chasing her to kill her. Not even a moment had passed before the other parties had also reached the river. Rendong could only find some reeds to hide in. Rendong glanced at Jiulu Yan, her heart silently thinking. She had an injury that had yet to heal, and she also had a nuisance with her, who only knew how to cause trouble for other people. If she wanted to fight to the death and cut a bloody path out of her plight, that would be impossible. The only thing she could count on was hiding carefully. After the others left, then she could plan further. Her eyes flashed as she noted people in black armed with torches everywhere patrolling the area. The closest one to them was only half a jong away from them, and if they weren't borrowing the curtain of darkness, they probably would have been discovered by now. The person who was now searching in the reeds wielded his broadsword and began chopping off huge pieces of reeds, making it harder and harder for Rendong to hide. She pinched the arrow in her sleeve tightly, carefully searching for an opportunity to noiselessly kill this person. All of a sudden, that black-clothed person began to tremble from head to toe until he fainted powerlessly. Rendong was amazed, but she saw Jiulu Yan smile at her as he waved the little embroidered bag in his hand and whispered, "I was afraid people would steal my tails, so I put a herbal powder in this bag. The moment normal people come in contact with it, they will collapse." Rendong pursed her lips. Which unlucky thief would end up stealing from him? Who's over there? Unexpectedly, one of the people clothed in black began to yell. Immediately following, a few torches were thrown over, lighting up the entire bed of reeds. As the fire began to surround them, there was no longer any way to hide. "Give me your embroidered pouch." Rendong took Jiulu Yan's pouch and grabbed onto his collar. Pushing off of him, she leapt out of the reeds and shook his little embroidered pouch in the air. His tails mixed with the medicine fell out onto the entire ground. Underneath her, many of the men clothed in black immediately fell to the ground, unable to utter another sound. The moment she landed, Rendong coolly clapped and then returned the embroidered pouch to Jiulu Yan. Jiulu Yan's eyes filled with tears as he hurriedly ran over and picked up his tails that had fallen onto the ground. He was still wailing, my tails, wifey, wifey." He turned and accused, "Wifey. How could you squander our money like that? Let's not marry." Jiulu Yan became silent as he bit his lip. Feeling wronged, he glanced at Rendong until she felt guilty. Then, he turned towards Rendong and picked up more tails from the ground. "Little flowery flower wifey, next time you cannot." Before he could finish speaking, his foot caught on a rock and he stumbled, his body suddenly beginning to fall forwards. Rendong hadn't completely put up her guard against Jiulu Yan, so the next moment, Jiulu Yan hugged her waist and fell onto the ground with her. At that same moment, 2 arrows flew past Rendong's ears, accompanied by the sound of an arrowhead ripping apart flesh. Rendong blinked momentarily. She couldn't feel any pain, something that she had come to know well. She glanced down, only to find that a white-plumed long arrow had embedded itself into Jiulu Yan's back, rendering Jiulu Yan completely motionless as he lay limp in her embrace. He had saved her? Rendong widened her eyes in shock, as she looked at the unconscious Jiulu Yan in disbelief. They had only interacted for a few days, but he had already saved her twice. And this time, he had even risked his own life to protect her. She almost choked as she stammered, why would he do something this staggering for someone like her? If Jiulu Yan was still awake at this point, he would be trying to make things clear to her. He had only tripped on a rock and it just so happened that he fell towards Rendong at that moment. He wasn't that grand as to sacrifice himself for someone else. Without giving Rendong more time to mull over the situation, 2 more arrows shot out of the forest. Rendong unsheathed her sword and brushed the sharp arrows aside with 2 clanks. Her brain rapidly calmed, as she thought, some black-clothed men must still be in the forest. If I let them find us. She looked around and spotted a rushing river below her. Then, she carried Jiulu Yan tightly. Let's gamble on this round. Chapter 5. When Jiulu Yan woke up, he found that he was in an extremely familiar place, the 100 Li slope. The only thing about it was that it was extremely different from what he had been familiar with in the past. Weeds were covering up the entire area that was so thick that people would practically drown in it. He rubbed his shoulders and sat up. When he surveyed his surroundings, he found that someone else was even sleeping beside him. He seized that person up and excitedly shook her awake. Little flowery flower wifey. How coincidental, how coincidental. You're also sleeping here. Rendong immediately opened her eyes when Jiulu Yan touched her. Subconsciously, she grabbed Jiulu Yan's arm and flipped in front of him, one hand on his throat, controlling all of his movements. Jiulu Yan began to incessantly wail in grief. It's me. Wifey, it's your hubby, your hubby. When she heard this sound, Rendong loosened her grip and let go of him, only indifferently saying, sorry. If this had happened in the past, she probably wouldn't even be saying a word of apology. Jiulu Yan rubbed his arm as he muttered about this and that. Rendong glanced at him a few times and asked, who are you? I'm your hubby, he glowered. Rendong looked at him for a while. Did you know you were shot by an arrow just a little while ago? Jiulu Yan's hands paused. I didn't know. His voice was just as lively as in the past, because I can't even feel any pain. Rendong didn't speak further as she carefully appraised Jiulu Yan. When she jumped into the river with him, the water had been spraying down on them the entire way. She originally thought that Jiulu Yan's wound would become inflamed and fester, and even make him die, but after she climbed ashore when she pulled the arrow out, no blood spewed out. She had seen his skin fuse together at a speed that no average human could replicate. Who are you? She asked again. Jiulu Yan laughed and pulled up a few long strands of grass from beside him, beginning to toy with them in his hands. This place used to be my home. 1,000 years ago it was called the Palace of the Chen Nation. The ancient Chen Nation. Rendong was shocked. I am the emperor's son. After I died, I was put in a coffin made of frigid jade. No one would have thought that the coffin had the power to resurrect someone, but it transformed me into a jianshi. He cut his fingers with the silver grass in his hands, but no blood seeped out. The wound also immediately healed. He laughed as he said, I can't bleed, I heal at an astonishing rate, I can't live, and I can't die. It must be extremely disgusting to you. He looked up at Rendong, thinking that she would turn pale with fright and walk away in panic. To his surprise, she continued to watch him coldly, as she asked, you still look about 20 years old now, so you must have died when you were 20 years old. How did you die as a nation's crown prince? I was poisoned. He calmly replied, while I was alive I stuttered. Some people felt I couldn't become the emperor and gave me the reborn turtle dove's poison. Rendong was startled. Yeah, it's the same poison that your sect leader has. But my luck wasn't as good. I couldn't live as long and eventually died. Everything happened so quickly, I didn't even have any time to heal myself. I guess I consider coming with you on this trip a part of fulfilling my desires. Rendong's lips twitched. Jiulu Yan managed to see it, as he began to smile again, but now, I want to ask your sect leader if I can have you for my wife. Why, me? Jiulu Yan slowly folded the grass in his hand into a grasshopper. He gave it to Rendong and said, because even though I've died, I still act like someone alive, while even though you are alive, you are even quieter than someone dead. My intentions are good. I want to help more people before I am reborn. If I don't do anything, it will be hard for me to while away 1,000 years. He stood up and stood next to a dead tree. As he touched it, he said, this is a peach tree that I planted 1,000 years ago. Later, it built up its spirit and every day it would mock me for being a stammering son of a local tyrant. I didn't think that after so many years have passed, I no longer stammer, but the original form of this demon has also died. At this moment, Rendong felt that the loneliness that she glimpsed in the figure of Jiulu Yan, who was standing under the sunlight, made her heart clench indescribably. He had passed 1,000 years all by himself. Anyone could be a passing traveler in his life, but he could only be a passing traveler in someone else's life. How difficult must it be to dispel 1,000 years of loneliness? For some reason, Rendong stretched her hand out to grasp Jiulu Yan's 2 fingers. A warmth seemed to pass into his fingers, and Jiulu Yan was stunned, turning to look at Rendong. Rendong had also been shocked by her actions. After a very long silence, she lifted the grasshopper in her hand and said, the weaving is pretty nice. Jiulu Yan laughed, without a doubt. Chapter 6. On after finding out Jiulu Yan's identity, it did not impact the course of their travels. Rendong only harbored tacit approval for Jiulu Yan's actions both in the past and in the present. Rendong gradually began to realize that every time Jiulu suddenly requested to change their route, the people chasing after her would appear on the paths that they were originally going to take. She thought, if not for Jiulu who has been helping me in this way by changing our route, I would have been dead by now. The farther they walked south, the fewer people chased after them. Rendong estimated that there were about 3 more days to go until they would reach the main camp of the shaman sect. This morning, Jiulu woke up Rendong early and said, "Let's go look at the peach trees." Rendong had already gotten used to these types of actions from Jiulu. She immediately packed their belongings, thinking that they would be hiding from the killers again. She didn't think that this time, Jiulu would bring her along to look at the peach blossoms. He brought Rendong along as they ambled along the bypath that was full of peach trees, as he contentedly smiled. He called Rendong over to stand underneath a tree. With a light touch, the tree's pink petals seemed to sprinkle everywhere, as they all fluttered about and drifted onto Rendong's body. Rather unaccustomed to this, Rendong patted the flowers on her body off. She was used to blood coating her entire body, and she wasn't used to such elegant things. "Little flowery flower. Let me dance and sing for you." Jiulu stood 3 steps away and broke off a peach blossom branch. He held it in his hands as he danced while he sang, "Peaches, oh peaches, oh peaches, oh peaches, oh peaches, how gentle, oh gentle, oh gentle, oh gentle." The out-of-place song coupled with the out-of-place dance made Rendong smile instinctively. "Wifey, do you think I'm beautiful?" Jiulu inserted the flower branch into his hair and ran over eagerly to show it off. The springtime sunshine made the enchanting peach blossoms glitter, and it also enhanced Jiulu's smiling face. Rendong watched him with a small smile of her own and helped him reorder his hair. "Stunning." When these words were said, Jiulu wasn't the only one who blanked, even Rendong blanked. But while Rendong blanked, Jiulu immediately presented a huge smile. "Ah ha ha ha. Of course, this nobleman is the only one of my kind. I am very stunning." As for Rendong, she continued to repeat 2 words in her head. "Oh no." When faced with such beautiful things, slowly, she was unable to reject them. In the evening, they stepped into shaman sect territory. The moment they stepped over the boundary, someone conveyed to Rendong that the sect leader was critically ill and told her to go at full speed over. She immediately began to rush back. On the 2nd day after they reached the shaman sect, there wasn't any time to rest. The sect leader immediately called for Jiulu and asked him to come to him. In another bamboo building, Rendong watched the scene below her from a corner, unwilling to leave. Only 2 days later did Jiulu strut out. As he smiled, "There's only this much to the reborn turtle dove's poison. If my body had been stronger back then, I could hold out a little longer, and completely get rid of it." He patted Rendong's shoulder and said, "Wifey, from today on, you are mine. Come with me." When he finished, he walked towards the shaman sect border with her. Rendong followed behind him and walked a few steps. She hadn't adapted to the situation yet, when she suddenly heard the voice of the left protector, "Divine Doctor, please wait a moment." Jiulu pulled Rendong's hand towards him and did not let go. "Isn't the poison gone? As long as you eat that medicine for 2 to 3 days afterwards, it will completely heal." "I am not speaking about that. Divine Doctor, you must know that Rendong is someone from our shaman sect. She grew up in the shaman sect, and the sect leader has something to tell her." Jiulu pouted, and unwillingly let go of Rendong's hand. He watched as Rendong walked into that black bamboo building and suddenly loudly began to yell, "Little flowery flower wifey, don't be afraid. If they do anything to you, I can poison the entire shaman sect." The face of the left protector, who had just stepped into the door, went black, and he angrily shot a glare at Rendong. Rendong looked down and gazed fixedly at the ground as they walked up to the 2nd floor. However, in her heart, she was secretly laughing. Chapter 7. The 2nd floor was completely dark. While heading up, she could feel layers upon layers of chilliness that seeped into her bones from the air. "This doctor likes you." When she stepped onto the last step, the person sitting behind a bamboo hanging screen suddenly spoke, his voice full of ridicule. "It's only a pity." His voice seemed neither masculine nor feminine. When people heard it, they became cold from the inside out. The sunshine outside the window fell through the bamboo curtains at the window, creating an orderly and distinct combination of shadow and light on her body. Rendong deferentially knelt and the light on her body followed her up and down motions, becoming bent. This one pays her respects to sect leader. How strange, you still remember you are one of the shaman sect. A burst of frigidness traveled along Rendong's back as she looked down without a word. Just a while ago, that doctor asked me if he could have you. I have agreed. He spoke slowly, but this just made people feel as if they were receiving death by 1,000 cuts. However, you should also know that no one can walk out of the shaman sect alive. Rendong's long eyelashes covered up all of the emotions in her eyes, making her look like a lifeless puppet. As per the doctor's request to save you, I have agreed with him and allowed you to go. However, light suddenly burst through a crack in the bamboo curtains and broke through the black smoke that was emitted from the incense burner in the middle of the room, directly pointing at the space between Rendong's eyebrows. Rendong let out a smothered groan as her limbs suddenly went powerless and she limply lay on the floor. Following this, bursts of tightening pain, that felt like needles, stemmed from her chest, becoming increasingly intense. I have just activated the poison in your body. In the future, the goo insects will devour your heart every night. If you complete your last mission, I will give you the antidote, and give you your freedom. Rendong thought, how nice would it be if she could gouge out her own heart at this moment? She wouldn't have to feel the pain of the goo, she wouldn't have to be forced to do something against her heart, and she wouldn't have to feel these shackles around her freedom, as they manipulated her. Just now, when that doctor helped me feel my pulse, he saw what I looked like. Since things have come to this, I cannot let him live. I know he is not an extraordinary person. If other people want to kill him, it will not be easy. But since he clings to you so tightly, he will not put up his guard against you. For these types of people, the heart is their weakest point. Kill him and bring me his head. Rendong's world solely consisted of the voice that was indistinctly yin or yang. The pain in her heart gradually vanished. Rendong lifted her head to look outside the window. She knew the man that looked like a child would probably be waiting for her, extremely anxious. The sunlight outside of the window fell onto Rendong's eyelashes and pierced her eyes, making her eyes sting for a second. She closed her eyes, her voice is hoarse and unrecognizable. Chapter 8. Little flowery flower, did they bully you? When she came out of the bamboo building, Jiulu anxiously grabbed Rendong's hands as he sized her up. Stupefied, Rendong allowed him to do whatever he wanted. Then, she suddenly grasped Jiulu's hands tightly. Jiulu was shocked, but he saw that although her face was pale white, her eyes were full of bright and beautiful sunshine. Her lips also carried traces of a smile. Jiulu, after we leave this place, will you marry me? This was the first time he had seen Rendong smile so quietly like a normal girl. It was also the first time when he realized that when Rendong smiled, she was pretty and her dimples were revealed. He dumbly nodded his head. Then I guess I'm the crown princess of Chen. Rendong looked down. It wasn't clear whether she was sad or happy, but she whispered, how domineering. Rendong said, Jiulu, Yan Gui. I'll marry you, so I ought to return with you. I think your courtyard in Luoyang was pretty nice. Let's go home. Jiulu loved it when Rendong said the word home with some excitement, some yearning, and something indescribable. This made him feel like he was a real husband, with a wife, and a responsibility. Even if he had always called her wifey from the very beginning, that had been his teasing. He didn't know when this had happened, but he had suddenly gotten caught up in his game, and now he was unable to get away. They peacefully returned to Luoyang. The two of them didn't have any good friends. On the day they married, they sat down looking into each other's eyes for a long time, a pair of small eyes looking into a pair of big eyes. Eventually, when night fell, they went to buy some small dishes and 2 red candles. When they returned, they put the table up and stuck them into their steamed buns as they bowed to each other and married. With the concise ceremony, when the both of them returned to their room to sleep, Rendong clenched her teeth and threw herself into Jiulu's embrace. He was shocked as she clung to him firmly. When she let go, Rendong said, I guess this counts as a skin-to-skin relationship. Now we're husband and wife. Jiulu was still stumped for words. Rendong stood on tiptoe and pecked him beside his mouth. All wives love their husbands. When she finished, she promptly turned and ran off, leaving Jiulu all alone as he touched the corner of his lips, his eyes becoming deeper. Chapter 9. Since then their lives together were very calm. The two of them were a little unaccustomed to this, as ever since they had met, they had been constantly on the move and escaping for their lives. However, this was the first time Rendong felt like she was living like a real person. The smile on her face gradually widened day by day. But every night, she never slept with Jiulu in the same room, and sometimes she wouldn't even be in the house. Rendong didn't say anything, so Jiulu pretended as if he didn't know. The two of them lived extremely happily. All the neighbors talked about how the two of them were such a loving couple. However, unknowingly, Jiulu gradually began to smile and laugh less. Then one night, Jiulu heard a vomiting sound coming from the courtyard. He couldn't pretend to sleep any longer and flipped off of the bed. When he got outside, he saw Rendong crouching in a corner of the courtyard and vomiting blood all over the ground. Let's return to Nanjiang. Rendong hurriedly wiped her mouth off and looked at Jiulu in shock. You. Give him whatever he wants. Jiulu said, his expression the sternest Rendong had ever seen. Rendong stroked her heart and shook her head. I've married you, so this is my home. I won't go anywhere. I've divorced you. Go back to Nanjiang by yourself. Rendong still shook her head. Jiulu was furious. What good do you see in me? How am I worth you risking your life to accompany me? You saved me before. Perhaps Jiulu had never known how big of grace his actions had been to someone of the shaman sect, or how touching his actions had been to her. I have never saved you. The first time was because I was interested in you temporarily, and the second time was an accident. Rendong did not believe him in her silence. She knew that even if he hadn't saved her, he had protected her from the bottom of his heart. He had brought her to see the peach blossoms and married her home. Now, he was about to chase her away. Everything he did was for her sake. Jiulu saw Rendong hang her head, as she expressionlessly stood in the corner. The darkness seemed to have the power to break her lonely figure. Some dried blood that she hadn't wiped away was still by her mouth. At this moment, his heart clenched and hurt. What were his terms so that he would take away the goo? Rendong didn't speak. What did he want? Your head. Jiulu's forehead creased and he began to curse. Does he have issues? In circumstances like this, Rendong still smiled at Jiulu's yelled curse. Yes, he has issues. However, Jiulu couldn't laugh. He looked fixedly at Rendong as if he wanted to see through her. As he looked at her peaceful smile, he felt that over the millennium, this was the first time he had felt his heart pulse steadily while it throbbed in pain. When I was little, I was raised as a dead soldier. I didn't have any freedom or respect. I was only an instrument. I knew one day, I would die for someone else, and it could happen at any moment, but just as how everyone who knows they are going to die still yearns to live, I was also that way. Even if I could live for just a single moment longer, I was willing to put forth my all for that one moment. At least, that was what I thought in the past. Rendong said, but Jiulu, it's only after meeting you that I realized that I have never lived fully in the past. Just like what you said, I live, but I am quieter than one who is dead. The sect leader told me to kill you. I thought, if I did do that, in the future, even if I can live for 1,000 more years or 1,000,000 more years, I am afraid everything lively in my life will disappear. But now, as I vomit blood and my heart hurts like it is being ripped apart, I feel my life is so lively that even I have been touched. Jiulu, happiness really cannot make one live longer. Jiulu swallowed. How would someone like him not understand this? He had known that Rendong's body had already been so damaged by the goo's poison that it would never return to what it used to be, even if the goo was removed. That was why he had allowed Rendong to return home with him by not heeding the law at all. But, he had overestimated himself and overestimated Rendong. Who knew when it had happened, but in his life, this girl who usually looked apathetic had no longer become just a simple traveler. Jiulu, you probably know my body better than I do. Didn't you decide for me already? Why do you want to chase me away now? Did you think? Jiulu knit his brows and spoke with much difficulty. I wouldn't ache. His concern for her threw him into chaos. In the end, his heart had stirred. Rendong was startled, as the squeezing pressure in her heart and the warmth of her blood spread through her entire body. She looked down and helplessly gave a bitter laugh. I can't do anything about that either. I still want to stay by your side. Jiulu's throat moved. It's up to you. Jiulu, I'm sorry. Chapter 10. End of March, a fragrance is everywhere in the air. Jiulu moved a chair over and sat in the courtyard, basking in the sun. Beside him, there was an empty seat. Not too long passed before Rendong slowly walked over, clad in a cloak. The two of them leaned on the back of their chairs as they sat there side by side, before they closed their eyes, enjoying the bright and beautiful sunlight. How comfortable, how comfortable. Yes. Rendong's answer was extremely soft. It's just like the first time I met the most beautiful sun in you. She smiled as she reached her hand out to grab Jiulu's hand. Jiulu followed her wishes and grasped her hand tightly. Ever so slowly, Jiulu Yan became the only person holding on. After the hand in his grasp gradually became cold, Jiulu Yan used his other hand to block the intense sunlight from his eyes. As the sun shone, the droplets coming from the corners of his eyes slowly tumbled down his face. Ah, little flowery flower wifey. The sunshine is so intense, oh so intense. But this time, Rendong did not reply again. End of story.